Good evening and welcome to Suffering in Silence with Minister Tia on Luv Bay Afrobeat Music Talk Radio. We're here with you every Friday evening at 7 p.m. Eastern. Luv Bay family, we are rising out of the ashes together. On tonight, our topic is House of the Moon, and we have with us our co-host, Jan 2 of the Blue Sky Show from Luv Bay.
Minister Tia, it's such an honor for you to have me on the show. Thank you so much.
Thank you for being here. And Jan 2, her show is Saturday evenings at 7 p.m. Eastern. And our guest on tonight is Erin Mitchell from House of the Moon. Listeners, if you have any questions or comments for our guest or our co-host, you can email us at sufferinginsilencedv@gmail.com. If you have resources that you would like to share with us on a national or local level from your country, your community, your local organizations, or your faith community, you can also email us at sufferinginsilencedv@gmail.com. Listeners, if you send us the information, we will share it. And we are so thankful to have so many listeners around the globe. But there are so many places that we can't get information for. We need your help. So if you get it and send it to us, we will absolutely share it. With that, Jan, you want to introduce yourself? Well, I'm sorry, let me correct myself. Not introduce yourself. But Jan, too, you want to say hello to the Luv Bay family?
Well, I want to say thank you for having me on your amazing show. And yes, we've got listeners from all around the globe, from Africa, throughout the United States, Canada, Europe, and the Caribbean. So I just want to say it's such a pleasure being here on this amazing show with your wonderful guests. And I just can't wait for you ladies to start getting into that. Because there's so much to decipher this evening. Thank you, Minister Tia.
Yes. Erin, please say hello to our listeners.
Hello, Luv Bay listeners. It is such a privilege and honor to be one of Minister Tia's guests on this fabulous show this evening here on the Pacific Coast time. But I'm just so excited to be here and to connect with all of you around the globe, especially women and young women out there that are listening. So excited to be here.
Thank you. So, listeners, as usual, we want to start with sharing some resources. Tonight we have from Kenya, Africa, Coalition on Violence Against Women. Their website is covaw.or.ke. From Malawi, Africa, we have Center for Alternatives for Victimized Women and Children. Their website is cavwoc.org. Their phone number is 265-052-39876, and their email address is cavwoc@gmail.com. And then from Mauritius, Africa, we have SOS Women. Their website is sosfemmes.intnet.mu. And again, listeners, on tonight, our topic is House of the Moon. And so, Erin, I would just ask you if you could tell Luv Bay, what is House of the Moon and how did it come to be?
Yes, thank you. So House of the Moon it's a lot of things. It is a pilot program, and it's also a collective vision that we hope to take forward into the future of women and girls' lives, and both Indigenous women, but also really for all women that are impacted by victimization. So, it's a holistic empowerment and self-defense facilitator training program, specifically held for Indigenous women in North America, which the native tribes here have called North America Turtle Island. They do not use borders that separate, their false borders between U.S. and Canada. and Canada and Mexico. They're imposed borders. And so Turtle Island is really the tribes and First Nations and Indigenous people from Turtle Island. The women are welcome to take this training program and become facilitators in empowerment and self-defense in their own communities. After they graduate, they earn that certificate to be able to go into their own communities and share the knowledge and hold gatherings.
So how did you create this program? Like where did the idea come from for House of the Moon?
It as all things, it's not just one idea. It's almost like a kaleidoscope or a coming together of multiple paths that get you in the right place at the right time,
right.
with the right luck and the right wind behind your back. And so, but it really came about through a simultaneous recognition in myself and an understanding that me as a woman and as all women are life givers, and we give life. It's not a metaphor,
Yes.
it's a literal thing that we have that gift and power to give life. And at the same time, through a series of changes in my life, I was seeking a way to make a more significant impact in the world that we were living in. And I sought to understand the genocide here in the United States that occurred, because I didn't know a lot about it. I didn't understand really the history behind the genocide of Indigenous peoples and tribes. Mm-hmm. And so I went back to learn that knowledge in my early 40s, and trying to understand one of the root causes of what I felt our nation's failings, and that we could do better. And so I learned about murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls crisis in this country, and also on a globally. It basically is why it's called a crisis, is because there's significant data that has reported that thousands of Indigenous women and girls have gone missing or murdered every year. And this crisis or tragedy continues. And again, it's not just happening in the United States, but it also in Canada, in Mexico, and globally as well. And so this training program came about to say, you know what, we are life givers. We give life. We can't change the systems that victimize women. It's long changing to strategies to shift governments, policies, structures and systems that have contributed to this tragedy. But women can become more empowered through knowing and reclaiming their worth and their value and their roots, who they are, where do we come from, who are our people, what lands do we come from? All of us, we're all displaced, and especially the Indigenous people here in North America.
Okay, so I want to ask you, I understand the self-defense portion of the program, but can you talk more about the other components of the program? Because I hear motivation and empowerment, so can you talk about those components?
Yes. So when we call it holistic empowerment and self-defense, it's exactly why we use self-defense in the name, right? Because people understand that. That's crystal clear. I get that. I know how to defend myself in a physical way. And the women do learn that as part of their training. But when we say holistic empowerment, it's really that acknowledgement that our spirit and our body are not separate, and that, just for example, here's an example of this. Military suicides, they're 4 times higher than the deaths in war operations here in the United States. So these are very physically fit people, right?
Yeah.
But suicide is they're victims of this tragedy. So when it comes to holistic empowerment and self-defense, we know that just working with the body is not enough. It's the spirit, it's the mental, it's the emotional, and it's all of that working together that really empowers someone to reclaim their value and their worth.
Jantu, you have a question or a comment?
Yes, I think what Erin has said is so powerful. And right here in Canada, there are so many articles, and most of the articles that are written about the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, you'd see the terms such as genocide. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the things that we need to do as a people is to bring awareness to this. And Minister Teo, I am so pleased that you bring this to the forefront, because here in Canada, I believe we need to be more educated on this subject, where we can actually pay attention to what is going on. We found here in Canada children that were murdered, so many. It is so heart-wrenching. And I'm so happy that the children are powerless. Now let's protect them. But as for Erin's program, I believe that the women absolutely need this. This is a necessity, so I'm so pleased that you're bringing this to the forefront. But I read something about Erin, and I read your story, and I did some research. And so you were the youngest of 10 children. And one of the things that I read that made me smile is that your sister actually paid for you to go to college. And I also read that you became a stockbroker. So you absolutely know how to run organizations such as the one you created. You dealt with hedge funds. And certainly you need money, you need funds to run an operation such as this. So you do have the experience in this. So I'm just saying kudos to you. You started out in the stock market, but look at where you are now. I think one of the quote you said, I wrote it down somewhere, is that you spend 16 hours a day making the wealthy even more wealthier. But I do believe that at times such as this, it is about service. And that is what you are rendering to people, our people, because we are one people. So for that, I say thank you. Minister Tia?
So, Erin, I want to ask you, what have you seen in your efforts to bring awareness to missing and murdered Indigenous women and children? I mean, there had to have been something that opened your eyes, I want to say. Something that opened the door, because, as Jantu just mentioned, you made a completely different change from, stockbroker to now House of the Moon. So what have you seen, and what are you seeing in your efforts to bring awareness to this issue?
First, thank you so much, Jan, for that beautiful acknowledgement and just being witnessed and seen in that way. And I think, and thank you, Minister Tia, for that great question. What I've seen is that there are so many beautiful hearts out there that when you can connect on a human level, on where it's not where you're talking about things that aren't statistics. People, they glaze over, but when you hear human stories, when you hear somebody's real truth, like your book, Suffering in Silence, it's your story. That's what touches the lives, right? And that's, so when it comes to what I've seen is that when I went out to meet Indigenous women and leaders and hear their stories, right, face to face, go in to the communities, ask if we can talk about this issue, talk about ideas for House of the Moon, talk about what's possible. And I hear stories of now my friends, my sisters. When I can share those human stories with my constituency or my network or my group, the caring is really, I find that it's there, people really care. And it's been very humbling to see how many people out of the woodwork in my life have stepped forward. Not everybody, everybody's overwhelmed. But really people that I would never have guessed have stepped forward to say, this really matters to me. And I've never thought about it before. And I'm so glad you're bringing it to our attention, and they want to know how to help.
So can you tell us, how long is the program at House of the Moon?
Yeah, so this second iteration, we're right now engaged in the second training group. It went from 4 months to 6 months. Okay. We lengthened it. And so right now this version is a 6-month primarily virtual training program. So it's done online. And then the idea is to have an in-person retreat at one point in the middle of the training program where the women can come together in person for many reasons. But that's the length of it altogether.
Okay. So can you take us through one day of the program for participants? What would one day be like for someone coming in and, and going through House of the Moon?
Yeah, so it's we run it in the evenings. Again, a lot of our decisions around how we deliver it have to do with reaching women that are working, that are taking care of their children. So we do 2-hour evening calls twice a week. And we run that for approximately 3.5 months straight. And then we have some breaks in between. Sometimes we'll have an intensive where the women will have to, they'll have to set aside 2 4-hour days or 2 8-hour days where they go into an intensive either for healing sessions or also just for deeper dives in learning. One of those was cultivating safe spaces with an Indigenous trainer, Elaine Alec. And she required more hours commitment, but we do try to make it those 2-hour increments so that women can have access, to their schedule, their schedules. It's something they can do if you're working and if you are caretaking your children. And that's really important for women that are vulnerable and also women that are carrying so much, so.
So it sounds like the mental and emotional part is just as important as the self-defense. And as you were saying before, about the suicide amongst the U.S. military, the mental and emotional part is huge. How much are the participants able to gain and walk away with through a virtual program? I mean, I know the answer to this, but it's just to share with Luv Bay, because this program is virtual and you're talking about self-defense, which is physical, and then you're talking about the mental and emotional aspect. Can you explain how that works and how women can gain virtually through a program like this?
Yeah, thank you. It's a great question. I think that, we all know that in person, to feel, to be with somebody, to smell and to see their eyes and their smile and their laugh and to embrace. And these are all ways that we can, be intimate with one another and get close. And so the reality is the pandemic hit, we were all kind of put into a position where we had to find creative ways to connect. And so that's really what drove this program into a virtual setting. But then it was almost divinely guided, because that allowed it to go forward with a lot less expense. And also bring in women from so many diverse communities together. So they're starting to see their sisters, across these imposed borders, right? They're starting to make connections. So yes, it's not ideal. It would be great to do in person, but for the training purposes, I think that they can come in. The first part, we do a lot of work where the women are learning how to trust one another. That's like the first order of business, getting them to share in a way that they feel that they're in a trusting circle. And then we move from that into their own healing. So after that trust is established through the curriculum and the delivery from the presentations, then the women get to, they're invited to go into some of their own personal experiences and traumas, and given tools and ways to start to heal from those experiences, at both as an individual but also as the collective whole. And then after that, that's when we start to get into the more of the detailed training, like knowledge about how human trafficking works, more of the statistical things, going into the physical self-defense protocols and such. And then the last part of the training, after they've gone through this beautiful series of what we've just spoken about, that's when we take them into really touching on their own personal story and becoming a leader in their community. Because so many of us don't believe that we're leaders, because we're just everyday people that have big hearts, and we think leaders are, they need this and that and this, education and this training and this, and we say in House of the Moon that one of the women, she did this disclaimer when she started to facilitate in her own community. She said, I'm not an expert. I'm a regular person who cares about my people, and I want to end this tragedy. I'm not an expert. And that's what she opened with in her community sessions. And so, but through the training with House of the Moon, that last part is really encouraging that confidence and self-esteem and having women step into that leadership role and not be afraid of it.
Yeah. So I want to ask you about the locations, and then Jan too, I'll go to you for a question and comment. But Erin, can you tell us about just the different locations that are represented? What are some of the different areas that women are coming from to participate in House of the Moon? Is it across the U.S.? Is it national?
Yeah. So it is, women are coming from First Nations in Canada, tribes in the U.S., and we do have some Mexican representation from indigenous tribes in Mexico, even though they live in the U.S. But their heritage, their tribal heritage, is indigenous from Mexico. So we have a representative from the Ponca Nation in Oklahoma. We have Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota. We have the Silk and Inkalketan First Nations in British Columbia. We have, let's see, I think there is 14 different nations.
Okay.
Across for this current training, and then collectively going back to the first training, that would probably be about 22 different nations. Awesome. That have been represented. Awesome. In North America. Okay. Yeah, Canada and the U.S.
Jancy, you have a question or comment?
Thank you so much, Minister Tia. I want to ask Erin, you see, trust is very vital within all communities. And in your communities where the indigenous people have been so disparaged, when a woman would come to you, just for listeners that's listening now globally, so someone would come to you and they have a trust issue. How long would you say approximately it would take that person to gain trust, to learn what you are teaching, to go out into the community and facilitate to help others?
So it's wow. I think it depends on the individual, and I think there's different layers of trust. And there are some women that it's taken 80 to get to 80 to 90% of the training before you see that kind of sunlight coming out. And then there were other women that was like the second training, the second session, and the sunlight was out. It was like, I'm here. This is where I belong, and I'm going to share everything because I love you all so much. And so I really do think it depends. And the other piece of it I'll share is that I do not do the training personally. Another thing that brings out trust for the communities that we work in is to bring voices from their own community. It is indigenous leaders that are offering this training. They are indigenous, mainly indigenous women, some indigenous men, but they are people that have been through it. They have that experience, and so much of this model, if this were to grow and go global, it's so important that the model incorporates bodies of work and voices from the very communities that you're trying to touch, no matter what. That's because that's how that trust is, I think, gained more quickly, Jan, than just having some talking head come in, even though the content might be really beautiful. One of my teachers in acupuncture school, she used to say, her name's Diane Connolly, and she used to say, you have to speak into the listening. Don't just, mouth off.
Yeah.
You gotta, who's listening?
Well, Luv Bay, we want to welcome you again to Suffering in Silence with Minister Tia on Luv Bay Afrobeat Music Talk Radio. We are here with you every Friday evening at 7 p.m. Eastern. We have a replay on Tuesdays at 1 p.m. and 7 p.m. Eastern, and also Thursdays and Fridays at 1 p.m. Eastern. Luv Bay, we are continuing to rise out of the ashes together. I want to say thank you again for my co-host being with me, Jan 2 of the Blue Sky Radio Show. She is on her program Saturday evenings at 7 p.m. And again, we are with Erin Mitchell of House of the Moon. I would like to share a few more resources. We have in Mayet, Africa, Association for the Status of Women and Victim Assistance. Their hotline number is 0269612949. In Nigeria, Africa, we have Project Alert on Violence Against Women. Their website is projectalertnig.org. And in Rwanda, Africa, we have Rwanda Women's Network. And their website is rwandawomennetwork.org. And as we return to our topic, House of the Moon, Erin, I want to ask you how do you, or how would you gauge the success of your program? Because you mentioned it's a pilot program. So how are you gauging the success of it to continue to move forward and expand?
Yeah. So definitely the first pilot, we had 100% graduation rate. So it was 7 women signed up, 7 women graduated, which is really beautiful. We are also gauging it by the impact in the individual communities. So for in order to graduate with this this Empowerment and Self-Defense Facilitator Certificate of Completion, it's 200 hour certificate of completion. In order to do it, the women are required to facilitate 6 gatherings in their own communities. And so we monitor those gatherings. We are counting who's attending, how many participants are coming in, how many different tribal members have been reached, how many women go on and continue to offer the gatherings after the after the program is over. And so one of the, so for the 7 women from the first pilot program, the program reached nearly 400 people from 30 tribes and First Nations. So that's only 7 women. And wow. So then we had 14 sign up for the second round. So we'll see, we're just about to go into the part where they go out into their communities. And so we'll be tracking those numbers. One of the women that graduated from the first round, she translated the home curricula to be age appropriate K through 12. And so she's now offering these House of the Moon gatherings in her school district 58 in British Columbia. So these are kind of some of the wins that we want to be tracking to say, okay, what's being done, what's the impact, and also just that the funds that are raised for the first round of training, 90% of the funds were invested in Indigenous leadership, artists, and small businesses. So again, really making it a full circle of thriving communities, so that the elders are getting compensated for how they're showing up. Part of empowerment is making a living. So to Jan's point, when you say I understand things take funding, that's also how you empower communities. So this has to have an economic piece to it, mm-hmm. even though it's hard to talk about, because it's for me, I've been volunteering to do this for the last 3 years, and that's not sustainable, right? So we can't get a volunteer executive director for the rest of this, if we want it to go on. So we have to start to be really pragmatic about these things. What are the costs? But also keeping the funds within the communities themselves, because that's also going to empower women and children and families who are involved.
Yeah. That is absolutely
Minister,
amazing. Yes.
Minister, do you have a question?
Yes.
Just to go back on something that Erin says. Erin, do you have elders involved in the teachings? Because, it's really important. There's an African proverb that says, when an old man passes, the library burned down. So are there elders involved in your program so that they can assist and teach your students?
Yeah, it's a great question. Absolutely. It's one of the ancient ways of, like you said, the African proverb, the value of elders is in Western societies has been lost and assaulted. And to bring back empowerment, it has to be a communication between the generations. And one of the most significant pieces of House of the Moon is the fact that we bring in, for every session, a elder, as we call it, elder support. So we might say bring in a social worker or a psychologist in case anybody has a traumatic reaction to something that's being spoken about. We have present in the sessions an elder from one of the communities, and a respected elder who is able to offer traditional ways to respond to traumatic feelings and perspectives, and really, like you said, that library of knowledge, because the things that they say, you can't get them in a psychology book.
Yes.
They pierce all of us, and I'm privileged to be witness to some of this wisdom that's getting shared from the elders to the women in the training.
I think it is absolutely amazing that 7 women turned around and touched 400. That's amazing.
That's incredible.
Yeah, absolutely. I hope that your numbers continue to grow that way. But that says so much about how this is needed on the physical, mental, and emotional level. That this can be imparted in a small group, and that group turn around and just go back and give what they've learned and what they've experienced to an even larger group, and then the process continues to grow. That is absolutely amazing. I want to ask you now, what are the requirements to become part of the program, and is it for women only?
So initially it was for, the pilot programs have been for Indigenous women in North America. And so this is kind of that conversation, Minister Tia, around what is House of the Moon, but which is a project and a pilot and a program, but what is the vision and what is the possibility? And so through going through this process, we start to get feedback. I started to get feedback from the women themselves that are wanting a program for men and boys, women and girls. They want a program for other women in other communities around the world. Some of the funders have been very specific about wanting to see more around even the two-spirited people and the LGBTQ community. And I think that there's so much potential and possibility here, because what House of the Moon is a container. And there's some wisdom that that crosses, it's our human heart. But then there's other pieces that could be very specific to the demographic that's being served. And those could be taken out and replaced with more relevancy to whomever you're serving. So if you are running a training program for men, you know, it would have different things in it, obviously. But
Right.
but again, this is really about healing, and it's about empowerment. And where does that come from? It comes from we ourselves, me, myself, speaking for myself, understanding my value and my worth in the world. And anyone who is born here listening is meant to be here. We are meant to be here, and we are meant to bring our gifts into the world. And so no matter who comes through this training as the possibility, that's what we want. That's what we want to come alive. But being more practical, it was for Indigenous women in North America was the criteria to sign up.
Okay. And can you tell us and the listeners, how can we find out more information about House of the Moon, contact information, website, just to find out about, you know, registration, or, you know, just to read up on it and just gain more knowledge? Where can listeners go to get more information?
Sure. It's the website is houseofthemoon.org, all one word, houseofthemoon.org. And the email address, the contact, is relative@houseofthemoon.org. And there's also a contact phone number on the website. And we don't have a huge presence on social media, although we do have a Facebook page, relative_home, and an Instagram page, the same, relative_HOM. And again, that's just due to us being new. It's only, you know, been in circulation for 2 years, and funding and staff and lots of things that startups, you know, have challenges with. So, yeah.
And how can donations be made to your program? And is it possible for someone to sponsor an individual to come into your program?
Yes, it is possible. We will have a general sponsorship fund for the next round of training. If you're an organization or you run an organization, and there is somebody that you know that would be, you know, that would find this valuable, and that could really serve to come back into the community with this certificate, then that would be, you could also sponsor a specific individual as well. But there is a donation link on the website, and right now we have a 501c3 fiscal sponsor, which essentially just means, I know you have so many global listeners, but it just means for donations from people in the United States, they're tax deductible.
Okay. Jan, too, you have a question or comment?
Yeah, my question is, Erin, you did mention that there's success from British Columbia, I believe you said. Are we speaking of Vancouver, Canada?
So we have a lot of council members that are from British Columbia that go into Chief Judy Wilson. She is she's the chief of the Nisconnet Indian Band, and also she is on the UBCIC Union of British Columbia Indian Chiefs. She's one of the leaders of that organization in British Columbia. The Union of British Columbian Indian Chiefs women's representative, the previous one, it was one of our actual presenters and trainers who I mentioned earlier. Her name is Elaine Alec, and the current women's rep from Union of British Columbia Indian Chiefs is Melissa Moses, and she graduated from our pilot training program and is also one of the founding council members of House of the Moon. And so there is a lot of activity in British Columbia. There are 4 women from different First Nations there that have come through the training. And I would love to share with you the Union of British Columbia Indian Chiefs. They put out a letter of support for House of the Moon. And one of the things I wanted to mention is that House of the Moon, again, this was organized not fully aware of the final report. It's called Canada's National Inquiry into the Murdered and Missing Indigenous Women and Girls Crisis. And it took place in 2019. And they issued calls for justice. And it was because they were interviewing all of the victims' families. And so they put forth these calls for justice. And so Union of British Columbia Indian Chiefs support for House of the Moon, they said that House of the Moon touches on 7 of these calls for justice, which is really amazing. And the other reason why they support House of the Moon is because the training upholds 2 articles from the United Nations Declaration, which affirms the rights of Indigenous women and children, that guarantees their full protection against all forms of violence and discrimination. And so for House of the Moon at such a young stage to be, answering these calls to justice, both from, Canada's National Inquiry, but also the United Nations, and that is a really powerful statement that we were able to receive. And again, I think that comes from Chief Judy Wilson's, hard work, Melissa Moses, all the women that have been involved in House of the Moon. This has been an incredibly collaborative effort.
I think that is really commendable. And I know here in Canada, there are so many, if you look at grants, I believe from what I have seen and what I've read, there certainly could be possibly grants to support what you are doing. And I really believe that the associates in British Columbia should seriously look into this. And I will certainly give you some information off here, but it's something that I think they should look into. And one question that I do have, because this program is for women and girls, what are the age limits? If there's a young girl that's listening right now, maybe somebody of 15, 16, is there an age limit, or what age can they apply to be in your program or inquire to be in your program?
Yeah, it's a great question. So it's an Indigenous, so the facilitator training program with this iteration is for Indigenous women, and the age requirement, I should have said this earlier, is 23. But again, when I talk about the possibility and potential, the younger women, it would be a phenomenal way to touch the youth and start early. And one of the requirements for this second round of training is that one of their gatherings has to be youth focused. And so when you say about age requirement, Jan, I think that is probably a community question, a community conversation, what a community is comfortable with, of which type of information introduce at what time. And that's why it's so valuable. The way that we come up with the curriculum is we come up with a draft, and then the community members weigh in, the council members and the people that understand their communities, and say, okay, I think girls 9 to 14 should have their own training curriculum specifics, and then 15 to 23. These are some of the things I've heard as we've discussed this very possibility that you're talking about. But it hasn't been put forth yet.
Minister Tia, one more comment, please. When you look at, there are so many articles, so many things that's been written about missing and murdered Indigenous women. And here's an article I read. The Native Women Association of Canada, the NWAC, has drawn attention to figures from I can never say that word properly, Statistics Canada, documenting the high rate against Indigenous women. They went on to say, for example, Indigenous women 15 years and older were 3.5 times more likely to experience violence than non-Indigenous women. So that was my reason for asking that question. But as you said, it more or less goes to the community. Thank you for that. Minister Tina?
Erin, I wanted to ask you, when the participants go through the program and they conduct their 6 gatherings, for the participants from that go on to become facilitators, does House of the Moon stay with those facilitators and watch over them and help them, or do you turn the participants, let them go on their own and they just take the program and go forward? Do you keep a connection with them? Does that facilitator then become a part of House of the Moon that way?
Yes, I love that question. And so they become, right now they're all becoming founding facilitators is what the name, and they get their name listed on the site, because we are such a young baby trying something new in the world. They are a part of that founding member circle. And the goal is to have monthly or bi-monthly sessions on Zoom for all facilitators, to have it be check-in, continue with the heart-to-heart sharing, what's happening when they're out in their communities. Are they running into challenges? Are they running into successes? So really having a sharing circle, also bringing the elders in for support, and also really having it be something where we can do continuing ed with them, right? So let's say they're seeing something in the communities that's coming kind of across the board, what they're noticing, and we can maybe bring in somebody that can add support or knowledge to support them in that learning. So that's another aspect of these gatherings to continue. The other really powerful thing that has been on the table is to really create a fund so that if they cannot get paid to facilitate gatherings from let's say their own tribal offices or their own community centers or something like that, then that House of the Moon could give honorariums or stipends or payment to these women that are willing to hold these gatherings in their communities. And if you've seen the yoga community and you see how that works, this is kind of what we're talking about, having these empowerment and self-defense gatherings popping up everywhere. And most yoga teachers don't do it for free. They don't. They either get paid by a drop-in fee, or they get paid by the studio or the church or the organization that they're teaching for. And so this is a way of just bringing traditional knowledge into these communities, but also making sure that women are getting compensated for the work, for the really hard work that they're doing.
Thank you so much. House of the Moon is an awesome program. I am thankful to have met you and learned of the program. Thank you for being with us tonight and sharing with us. As we are just under the hour, I would like to give each of you a few moments just for final comments. And Janto, I'll go to you first, and then Erin, I would just love for you to just give us a a final comment and just let Luv Bay know, what would you like them to take away about House of the Moon? Jantu?
I just want to thank Aaron for coming and sharing. I mean, this is so important. Yes. We need to understand as the people who were here first. We need to give that respect. We need to work with our Indigenous brothers and sisters to make sure that they are treated the way we all want to be treated, which is fairly. So I thank you so much for coming and sharing, and whatever we can do as the Luv Bay community to assist. We'll hold hands with you along with Minister Tia and walk with you. We will do our part. Thank you, Minister Tia.
Thank you. Aaron, your final words for tonight. What would you like to leave the Luv Bay community with about House of the Moon?
I would just say that, first of all, thank you, Jan, and thank you, Minister Tia, for this amazing experience to be with you and to share from my heart. And for the Luv Bay community and all the women and girls and listeners out there, that, you know, it's a chicken or egg thing. Do you take the steps to feel your worth and your value, or do you feel your worth and your value to take the steps? And it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It just whichever way it works for you, whatever comes your way first, just take that step and you'll feel that worth coming your way. And or you feel that worth because we're telling you that you're worthy. You're worthy to be here and to bring your gifts to the world, and then take that step. And so House of the Moon is just, we hope it lasts and we hope it goes forward, but it's really about each and every one of your community members, because it's community that makes this happen. It's not happening because there's some black and white solution to the world's tragedies. It's gray, it's messy, it's hard, and we as community members each have a perspective and a gift to bring to make it go forward.
Aaron, thank you so much. Thank you again for being here. Thank you, Jantu, again. Luv Bay, if you want to catch up on previous episodes from the program, you can visit our YouTube channel, Suffering in Silence DV. We want to thank you again for joining Suffering in Silence with Minister Tia on Luv Bay Afrobeat Music Talk Radio. We are here with you every Friday evening at 7 p.m. Eastern. And Luv Bay, we are continuing to rise out of the ashes together. Good evening.